Now comes the fun part. We're going to pick up the stitches down the side of the heel flap. So hold your sock so that your heel flap is facing you, and we always pick up the stitches down the left hand side first. On this sock it's quite easy. You can see there's a row of little holes down this left hand side, and so it's going to be one stitch in each one of those little holes. To pick up a stitch, you put your needle, in this case, into the hole, wind the yarn around, pull it through, and that's it. You've picked up a stitch. Put your needle into the next hole, wind the yarn round and pull it through. And you continue to do this all the way down your heel flap. And that is how you pick up and knit stitches. I've been able to pick up 16 stitches down the side of my heel flap. It's usually about one stitch for every 2 rows of heel flap that you've done, so the number that you pick up will depend on the yarn that you're using and also the number of rows that you put in your heel flap to get it as long as you want it to. Doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine, but you do need to be sure that you've picked up every stitch as you go along this heel flap. And then I like to put in one more stitch in this gap here between the top of the foot stitches and the heel flap, and that just stops you getting a hole in this space. Doesn't matter that it's an extra stitch because you're going to decrease back to your original number of stitches later. So I've now got 17 stitches here, and now what I'm going to do is knit across the top of the foot stitches, ready to pick up the stitches on the other side. Now on this short circular, your choice is either to use another double pointed needle and knit off the short circular so that you're knitting on 3 double points, or to use the short circular itself. And that's what I tend to do. It's really easy. You just bend the ends of the needle around to knit into a really small circle. You'll notice that I haven't put a stitch marker on the end of this needle here. You will need 2 stitch markers to show where your decreases are, but I haven't put one here because at the moment it would just fall off the double pointed needle, so we'll put that one on last just before we do the decrease. If you remember, we're continuing in pattern across the top of the foot stitches. We did row 1 when we set up for the heel flap, so now we will do row 2, which is just knit and purl all the way across until we get to the point where we're going to pick up the second set of stitches for the next side of the heel flap. And just so that you can see, it is quite easy to knit this section on the short circular needle. You just have to bend the ends around and you've got a very tiny circle. Now that we've knitted across the top of the foot stitches, we're ready to pick up the stitches on this side of the heel flap. First of all, we're going to pick up the stitch in the gap, just as we did on the other side, so that we don't get a hole. And before I do that, I'm going to put the stitch marker over the end of my needle. If you want to pick up these stitches on a double pointed needle, just as you did on the other side, if you find that's easier, you don't need to put the stitch marker on just yet because you'll find that it will fall off. So just go for whichever method you find easiest to do. For me, I like to use my short circular, and then that starts me putting my stitches back on the needle again, but it really doesn't matter which method you pick. I picked up the first stitch that's in the gap between the top of the foot stitches and the heel flap, and now I'm going to pick up the rest of the stitches along the side of the heel flap. You don't have the holes to help you this time, but you do have a larger stitch, which is what was created by the slip stitch that you did on every row of the heel flap. Some people like to pick up both sides of the stitch. I prefer to pick up just the inside stitch, and some people like to pick up the outside stitch. It really doesn't matter. As long as your yarn is going through that stitch, it's going to hold your sock secure. So just choose the method that you like the look of best. You can have a look and see how it's coming out in your sock, and just go with that one. The main thing is that you pick up 16 or 17 or however many stitches along this heel flap, and you're ready to join into the round again. Here are my heel flap stitches picked up. I actually picked up 16 along this side of the heel flap, but that's fine because that one extra stitch will just disappear when you do all the rest of the decreases to bring your sock back to the original size and number of stitches that you cast on. So now it's just a question of knitting across the heel turn stitches and then back down these heel flap stitches to stop 3 stitches before the end of this double pointed needle, and that's where your first decrease is going to take place. So here I am working my way down this last double pointed needle. You can see that pretty much all of my stitches are back on the circular needle again, and I'm just about to do my first decrease. So this is round 1 of the gusset decreases. I'm just going to knit these last couple of stitches and then do the decrease. And for this you're going to knit 2 together, so your needle goes knitwise into both stitches, yarn around the needle and then knit 1. That's the last of my double pointed needles gone, and I need a new stitch marker. I want it to be completely different to this one so that I know which is my knit 2 together decrease and which is my slip slip knit decrease. So got my little sheep marker here that's completely different to the flower on this side, and now I'm going to knit across the top of the foot stitches again, ready to get to the next decrease. So this is row 3 of the pattern, and we are working on round 1 of the gusset. Now this might be where it gets a little bit confusing, so you might want to make a note of exactly where you're up to. I'd certainly carry on keeping track of the pattern rows so that you know where you are with this one. Once you get going with the gusset decreases, it'll be much easier and you won't need to keep so much of a track, because you'll either be decreasing or you'll be knitting. But for now, I'm going to work row 3 of the pattern to get to this stitch marker here for the next decrease. I've just about finished the top of the foot stitches. I've just got the last couple of knit stitches to go and I'm coming up to the marker. Now you always do your decreases on this side of the markers. So I'm going to knit this last stitch, slip this marker from one needle to the other, knit the first stitch, and then do my next decrease, which was slip slip knit, just the same as you did on the heel turn. So I'm going to slip the first stitch, try not to drop my sock, slip the first stitch knitwise, slip the second stitch purlwise, slip them both back onto the needle and knit through the back of the loop. And then I'm going to knit all the way back round until I get to my marker. So this is where we did the decrease by this marker here. We've knitted all the way around, and now I'm coming back towards the first marker again, and we're about to start round 2 of the gusset decreases. So I just have to knit these stitches. You can see, if you look very closely, where the 2 stitches were knitted together on the round underneath. This time I just knit it. When I get to the marker, I slip it from one needle to the other, and then I carry on knitting across the top of the foot stitches in pattern. When I get to this marker, I slip it from one needle to the other, and then I knit all the way around back to 3 stitches before this marker, and that's where I'm going to do my next decrease, and that is round 3 of the gusset decreases. And then you just keep repeating round 2 and round 3 until you get back down to the original number that you cast on. So in my case, I'm going to decrease until I've got 64 stitches on my needle.